Gnosticism and Kabbalah, the hidden esoteric spine of Western spirituality, the inner tradition that no one taught in school. Ein Sof, the infinite, unknowable ground from which all creation flows. The Ten Sephirot, the map of consciousness that parallels the chakras. The Demiurge, the lesser God who made the world, not the true God. Gnosis, the direct knowing of your own divine nature that no church, priest, or institution can give or take away. The Nag Hammadi Gospels, the Christianity that didn't make it in the Bible. The letters of Hebrew, each one a world, each one a creative power. These are the Western esoteric roots of everything Halagricity draws from. Personal reading series, Halagricity, May 2026 IQ. Productions. Contents. Introduction, the hidden tradition behind the tradition. Kabbalah, Part 1, what Kabbalah is and where it comes from. Part 2, Ein Sof, the infinite ground of being. Part 3, the Tzimtzum, the divine contraction. Part 4, the Ten Sephirot, the map of consciousness. Part 5, the tree of life, how the Sephirot relate. Part 6, the four worlds, levels of reality. Part 7, the Hebrew letters as creative powers. Part 8, the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation. Part 9, the Zohar, the book of splendor. Part 10, the Golem tradition, Heka in Hebrew dress. Part 11, practical Kabbalah, prayer, meditation, and ritual. Part 12, Kabbalah's influence, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, Gnosticism. Part 13, what Gnosticism is and when it arose. Part 14, the Gnostic cosmos, Pleroma, Demiurge, and the sparks. Part 15, the Demiurge, the creator who is not God. Part 16, the divine feminine, Sophia and her fall. Part 17, Gnosis, knowledge that saves. Part 18, the Nag Hammadi library, what was found. Part 19, the Gospel of Thomas, the living words. Part 20, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Part 21, the Gospel of Philip and the Sacred Marriage. Part 22, the major Gnostic schools. Part 23, Gnosticism and its descendants, the convergence. Part 24, where Kabbalah and Gnosticism meet. Part 25, the Halagricity lens, the hidden Western spine. Introduction. The Western esoteric tradition, the current of sacred knowledge that flows beneath the surface of Western religious history, has two primary headwaters, Kabbalah and Gnosticism. Both emerged at roughly the same historical moment, in the same geographic region, in response to the same theological question. What is the deepest nature of the divine, and how does the human being access it directly, without the mediation of priests, institutions, or official doctrines? Kabbalah asks this question from within Judaism, developing an elaborate mystical framework that reveals the hidden structure of divine reality beneath the surface of Torah study and Jewish practice. Gnosticism asks the same question from within the broader Hellenistic world, producing multiple schools of thought that share a core recognition. The material world was created by a lesser, flawed, divine being. The true God is far beyond this world, and the human being carries within themselves a divine spark that can be awakened through gnosis, direct personal knowledge of its own divine nature. These two traditions are the hidden spine of Western spirituality, the esoteric stream that flows beneath the exoteric surface of Judaism and Christianity, and that fed the later Hermetic, Rosicrucian, Masonic, New Thought, and Theosophical traditions that directly shape the tradition Halagricity draws from. Understanding them is understanding the deep roots of everything in the Western half of the Haligric synthesis, the Jewish mystical tradition. Part 1. What Kabbalah is and where it comes from. Kabbalah is the esoteric, mystical dimension of Judaism, the tradition of direct experiential knowledge of the divine's nature and structure that has been transmitted within Judaism alongside the more publicly accessible tradition of Torah study, prayer, and ethical practice. Historical development. The Kabbalistic tradition did not appear from nowhere in the medieval period. Its roots extend into the Merkava mysticism of the Talmudic period, into the apocalyptic literature of Second Temple Judaism, and into the philosophical synthesis of Jewish thinkers who engaged with Neoplatonic philosophy in the early centuries CE. The specific Kabbalistic framework, the Sephirot, the Tree of Life, the Ein Sof, crystallized in the 12th to 13th centuries CE in southern France and Spain, most fully in the Zohar, Kabbalah at a glance. What it is, the esoteric, mystical tradition within Judaism, a framework for understanding the nature of the divine, the structure of reality, and the soul's journey primary texts, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Bahir, the Zohar, and the extensive Lurianic writings, central concepts, Ein Sof, the Sephirot, the Tree of Life, the Four Worlds, the divine sparks, the shattering of the vessels, and tikkun relationship to mainstream Judaism. Kabbalah has historically been restricted to mature scholars, understood as too powerful and too easily misunderstood for unrestricted access. This restriction has loosened significantly in the modern period. Influence. Kabbalah directly influenced Christian Kabbalah, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, the Western ceremonial magic tradition, Theosophy, and through all of these, the new thought tradition that Haligrisity draws from. Ein Sof, the infinite ground of being. Ein Sof is the Kabbalistic term for the ultimate divine reality, the infinite, unknowable ground of all being from which all of creation flows, but which itself cannot be described, named, or comprehended by any finite mind. Ein Sof is the Kabbalistic name for what Vedanta calls Brahman, what Taoism calls the Tao, what the Egyptians called None, what the Neoplatonists called the One. It is the divine before the divine is anything we can say about it. Why Ein Sof cannot be known. In Kabbalistic theology, Ein Sof is by definition unknowable, not because of our cognitive limitations, but because the infinite cannot be grasped by the finite without the infinite limiting itself in some way. Any positive description of Ein Sof is a description of one of the Sephirot, the divine attributes through which the infinite makes itself accessible to finite understanding, not of Ein Sof itself. Ein Sof has no attributes. It cannot be described in positive terms at all. The via negativa is the only honest approach to Ein Sof. Ein Sof and the global infinite. Ein Sof is the Kabbalistic expression of what every mystical tradition in the Haligrisity library recognizes as the ultimate ground of being, Brahman, the absolute, infinite, self-luminous ground from which all consciousness and all existence emerge. Neti, the same via negativa as Kabbalah's approach to Ein Sof. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, the same recognition that the ultimate cannot be captured in positive description. None, the primordial undifferentiated ocean of potential from which Atum emerged, the chaos before creation that is not nothing but everything before differentiation. Allah and Islamic mysticism, the Sufi understanding of the divine's absolute transcendence, beyond all names and attributes at the level of the divine essence. The pleroma, the fullness of divine light that exists beyond the material world, inaccessible to ordinary human perception, but the origin and destination of the divine spark within each person. The Haligric recognition, this convergence, every major mystical tradition independently arriving at the same recognition that the ultimate ground of being is beyond all positive description, is one of the most powerful confirmations of the Haligric synthesis. Haligrisity does not need to choose between these names. They are all pointing at the same reality from different angles. The Tzimtzum, the divine contraction. The Tzimtzum is one of the most original and most profound concepts in the Lurianic Kabbalah. It addresses what may be the fundamental metaphysical problem of any theistic tradition. If God is infinite and everywhere, how is there room for anything else? If the infinite fills all space and all being, how does the finite world come into existence? The Lurianic answer. Rabbi Isaac Luria's answer is that Tzimtzum, before creation, Ein Sof contracted, withdrew from a specific conceptual space, leaving an empty region into which creation could occur. This contraction is not a diminishment of the divine. It is a voluntary self-limitation that makes room for the other. Creation is an act of divine generosity. The infinite contracts to make space for the finite. After the Tzimtzum, the divine sent a single ray of light back into the empty space, and through this ray of light, the vessels were created to receive and contain the divine light. But the vessels shattered under the intensity of the divine light, scattering the divine sparks throughout the broken fragments of creation. The repair of this primordial shattering is the purpose of human existence and of all sacred practice. Connection to Haligrisity. The Tzimtzum's understanding that creation requires the infinite to voluntarily contract to make room for the finite, that the divine's greatest act is the act of generous self-limitation that allows the other to exist, is one of the most profound insights in any tradition. It is the theological foundation of Tikkun Olam, If the divine contracted to make room for human existence, then human beings are responsible for the quality of what fills that space. Human sacred work is not a supplement to the divine's work. It is the continuation of the divine's work in the space the divine opened for it. The Ten Sephirot, the map of consciousness. The Ten Sephirot are the 10 divine emanations through which Ein Sof progressively reveals itself, moving from the most transcendent and unknowable to the most immanent and accessible, from pure infinite light to the material world of everyday experience. The Sephirot are simultaneously aspects of the divine nature, dimensions of reality, levels of consciousness, and stages of the soul's development. The 10 Sephirot, complete. Keter, level 1, the highest Sephirah, the first emanation, closest to Ein Sof. Pure divine will before any content or direction, the nothing that is also everything, barely accessible to any finite mind. Chokmah, level 2, the flash of pure insight, the first intelligible emanation, the undifferentiated seed of all understanding. The Father principle, spontaneous, undivided, the moment of aha before the thought takes form. Bina, level 3, the womb that receives the seed of Chokmah and develops it into differentiated form. The Mother principle, where insight becomes comprehensible structure, the divine understanding that organizes the infinite flash of Chokmah into the specific forms of creation. Chesed, level 4, the overflowing, expansive, unconditional divine love, generosity without limit, expansion without restriction, the divine impulse toward giving. Gevurah Din, level 5, the divine principle of limitation, discipline, discernment, and just boundary setting, the loving limit that prevents chest from dissolving into formlessness, where divine love meets divine justice. Tiferet, level 6, the heart of the tree, the point of perfect balance between Chesed and Gevurah, the integration of love and boundary, mercy and judgment, associated with the heart, with the divine self-disclosure, with the sun principle. Netzach, level 7, the divine principle of the drives, the passions, the creative energy that moves toward expression. The feeling dimension of the divine, the motivating force behind all sacred creativity. Had, level 8, the divine principle of the intellect's acknowledgement of its own limits, the mind that recognizes its dependence on what is greater, where thinking meets humility. Yesod, level 9, the channel through which the divine flows from the upper Sephirot into manifestation, the sacred connector, the righteous one who sustains the world. Malkut, level 10, the Shekinah, the divine presence in the material world, the most immanent face of the divine, the feminine receiving principle, the divine as it appears in ordinary experience. How the Sephirot relate. The tree of life is the visual and conceptual map of the 10 Sephirot in relationship, showing how the divine energy flows from Ein Sof through each Sephirah in sequence, how the Sephirot relate to each other through the 22 paths connecting them, and how the entire structure maps onto the human being. The tree of life, structure and pillars. The 3 pillars, the right pillar, Chokmah, Chesed, Netzach, the expanding, giving masculine principle, the left pillar. Bina, Gevurah, Had, the contracting, limiting, feminine principle, the middle pillar. Keter, Tiferet, Yesod, Malkut, the central channel through which divine energy flows from the highest to the lowest, the 4 triads, the supernal triangle, the highest triad, the most abstract, most transcendent level of divine reality, the ethical triangle, the level of divine value and ethical principle, the astral triangle, the level of feeling, mind, and the flow of energy into manifestation, the earth, the material world, the receiving vessel for all that flows through the 3 triangles above the 22 paths. The 22 paths connecting the 10 Sephirot are associated with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Each letter a specific quality of divine creative power that flows between 2 specific Sephirot. The Sefer Yetzirah maps these associations in detail. Mapping onto the human body, the Kabbalistic tradition maps the tree of life onto the human body. Keter is the crown of the head, Chokmah and Bina are the 2 hemispheres of the brain, Chesed and Gevurah are the right and left arms, Tiferet is the heart, Netzach and Hod are the right and left hips, Yesod is the reproductive center, and Malkut is the feet. The human body is a tree of life. The tree of life is the divine pattern in human form. the four worlds levels of reality. Kabbalah organizes reality into four worlds, four distinct levels of being through which the divine light progressively condenses from pure spiritual light to the material world of ordinary experience. Each world contains its own tree of life, the four trees nested within each other in a hierarchy of decreasing abstraction and increasing concreteness. The four worlds, Atzilut, the highest world, the closest to Ein Sof, where the Sephirot exist in their most purely divine form. The world of pure divine attributes. Here, the human soul is at one with the divine. The distinction between creator and creation barely exists. Bariah, the world of the divine mind, where the divine will begins to organize itself into specific forms, where the blueprint of creation exists before it is built. The angels of highest order inhabit this world. Yetzirah, the world of divine feeling and energy, where the abstract blueprints of Bariah begin to take more specific form. The world of the lower angels and of the divine emotional qualities, where the pattern becomes feeling before it becomes matter. Asaya, the lowest world, the world of physical matter and ordinary human experience. The Sephirot in Asiya are most distant from Ein Sof, most condensed, most differentiated, most material. This is the world human beings inhabit in their ordinary consciousness. The Haligric parallel, the four worlds correspond to the Haligric tetralty's four dimensions. Atzilut corresponds to feeling, Bariah corresponds to thinking, Yetzirah corresponds to speaking, Asiya corresponds to doing. The Kabbalistic understanding that consciousness moves through four worlds from pure unity to material differentiation is the most elaborate ancient map of the same journey that the tetralty describes as the path of conscious creation. The Hebrew letters as creative powers, one of the most distinctive and most practically consequential claims of Kabbalah, is that the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are not merely symbols representing sounds. They are the primordial creative powers through which God spoke the world into existence. In the beginning was the Word, and Kabbalistic understanding, the specific Hebrew letters of that word are the specific divine forces, whose combination produced specific aspects of reality. The Aleph-Bet is the structure of reality. The Sefer Yetzirah, possibly the oldest Kabbalistic text, presents the Hebrew letters as the building blocks of creation. God engraved the 22 letters, hewed them, combined them, weighed them, and through their combinations created all of existence. Each letter corresponds to a specific creative force, a specific path on the tree of life, a specific quality of divine emanation. The three categories of letters, the three mother letters, the foundational creative principles corresponding to the three elements and to the three seasons. These three letters are the primordial creative powers from which all other letter combinations derive. The 7 double letters, letters with 2 pronunciations, corresponding to the 7 planets of ancient astronomy, the 7 days of the week, and the 7 openings of the head. These letters govern the alternating qualities of existence. The 12 simple letters, corresponding to the 12 zodiac signs, the 12 months of the year, and the 12 directional dimensions of space. The practical implication, if the Hebrew letters are the primordial creative powers through which reality is structured, then skilled use of those letters in meditation, prayer, and sacred practice is not merely symbolic activity. It is participation in the same creative activity through which the world was made. This is Heka in Hebrew dress. This is the Haligric understanding of the virescence given its most elaborate theoretical foundation in any Western tradition. The Zohar, the Book of Splendor. The Zohar is the primary text of the Kabbalistic tradition, a massive multi-volume work of Aramaic commentary on the Torah that is simultaneously a mystical novel, a cosmic creation myth, a map of the divine psyche, a guidebook for the soul's journey through multiple worlds, and the most comprehensive single document of the Kabbalistic worldview. Attribution and authorship. The Zohar is attributed within the Kabbalistic tradition to the 2nd century C. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his circle of disciples, who are depicted in the Zohar itself as walking through the Galilee discussing Torah, occasionally breaking into ecstatic mystical discourse. Most contemporary scholars attribute the text to Moses de Leon, a 13th century Spanish Kabbalist, who either wrote it himself or compiled it from earlier sources. Whether or not the traditional attribution is historically accurate, the Zohar appeared in Castile in the late 13th century, spread rapidly through the Jewish world, and was eventually accepted as a sacred text of the first order, placed by many Kabbalists alongside the Torah and Talmud in sacred status. Teachings. The Shekinah. The Zohar's most theologically innovative contribution is its development of the Shekinah, the feminine divine presence, the 10th Sephirot understood as the feminine aspect of the divine that dwells in the material world and in the Jewish people's experience. The Shekinah's separation from the masculine divine during the exile is the Zohar's primary theological narrative. The sacred marriage of masculine and feminine within the divine is what human prayer and sacred practice works toward restoring. The divine sparks. Every human being contains a divine spark, a fragment of the divine light that was scattered when the vessels shattered at creation. Sacred practice lifts these sparks back toward their source, contributing to the tikkun of the primordial fracture. The soul's structure. The Zohar develops an elaborate understanding of the soul's structure: nefesh, ruach, neshama, kaya, and yekidah. These 5 levels correspond to the 4 worlds plus the divine unity beyond all worlds. Erotic mysticism. The Zohar's theological language is explicitly erotic. The relationship between the masculine and feminine principles of the divine, the sacred marriage that is the goal of cosmic history, making it one of the most explicit traditions in the West to use sexual and romantic metaphor for the divine-human relationship. This connects it directly to the Sufi tradition's beloved lover metaphysics and to the Song of Songs' mystical interpretation. The Golem tradition, Heka, in Hebrew dress. The Golem tradition is the most dramatic practical expression of the Kabbalistic understanding that the Hebrew letters are creative powers, and the most direct parallel in the Western tradition to the Egyptian concept of Heka. What a golem is an artificial being created through specific combinations of Hebrew letters and the divine name. The Talmud records that the sages could create a calf for dinner through specific letter combinations. The medieval Kabbalistic tradition developed this into elaborate accounts of sages who created humanoid beings by writing specific letter combinations on clay figures and/or by writing the divine name on the figure's forehead. The theological significance. The Golem tradition is not merely a folktale about a magic clay man. It is a specific claim about the relationship between sacred language and material reality, that the same divine creative process through which God spoke the world into being can be replicated by a human being of sufficient spiritual development. The sage who creates a golem is imitating the divine creative act, participating in the same creative power that produced the universe. Connection to halagricity. The golem tradition is Heka in its most developed Western form. Heka holds that the properly aligned practitioner who speaks with the full power of the divine behind their words creates what they speak, makes what is named real. The Kabbalistic Golem tradition says the same thing, with the specific mechanism made explicit. Both are expressions of the most fundamental recognition. In any esoteric tradition, human beings participate in the divine creative process. The haligric virescence, the practice of supercharging intention through vibration, of speaking from full tetralty alignment, is the haligric form of Heka and the Golem tradition. The word creates. Words create. Aligned speech is the most powerful creative act available to the human being. Kabbalah's influence: Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry. Kabbalah's influence on the Western esoteric tradition, from the Renaissance through the Enlightenment and into the modern period, is the most significant intellectual and spiritual transmission in the history of Western esoteric thought. Understanding this transmission chain is understanding how the Jewish mystical tradition became the structural backbone of the entire Western occult tradition. The transmission chain. Christian Kabbalah. Renaissance thinkers took Kabbalistic concepts and integrated them with Hermeticism and Christian theology, creating Christian Kabbalah, which sought to demonstrate that Kabbalah confirmed Christian theology. This synthesis made Kabbalistic ideas available to non-Jewish audiences throughout Europe. Hermeticism. The Renaissance Hermetic tradition was deeply integrated with Kabbalistic concepts through the Florentine Academy and its synthesis of Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish mystical thought. The 7 Hermetic principles that underlie halagricity's cosmological framework were developed in this context of Egyptian-Greek Kabbalistic synthesis. Rosicrucianism. The Rosicrucian manifestos announced a secret brotherhood in possession of Paracelsian medical science and Hermetic Kabbalistic wisdom. Whether or not the Rosicrucian Brotherhood historically existed, the manifestos sparked a Europe-wide intellectual movement that synthesized Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and early modern science. Freemasonry. Freemasonry drew heavily on Kabbalistic symbolism. The Temple of Solomon is a Kabbalistic image. The 3 degrees of Freemasonry map onto the Kabbalistic tree of life, specific Masonic words and signs derived from Hebrew Kabbalistic material. The Golden Dawn. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn created the most systematic integration of Kabbalah, Hermeticism, astrology, tarot, and ceremonial magic in modern history. Its system, still the foundation of most Western ceremonial magic practice, places the Kabbalistic tree of life at the center of everything. New Thought and Halagricity, New Thought absorbed Hermetic Kabbalistic concepts through the Theosophical movement. The principle that aligned thought creates reality is the New Thought formulation of the Kabbalistic understanding that the Hebrew letters created the world. Gnosticism, the direct knowledge that could not be contained. Part 13. What Gnosticism is and when it arose. Gnosticism is the umbrella term for a diverse collection of early religious movements that share a core set of cosmological and soteriological claims. The material world was created by a lesser, flawed divine being. The true God is far beyond this world. The human being carries within themselves a divine spark that is imprisoned in matter, and salvation consists of Gnosis, direct personal knowledge of one's own divine nature that awakens the spark and begins its return to the divine source. The historical context. Gnosticism emerged in the same milieu as early Christianity. The 1st to 4th century CE Eastern Mediterranean world of Alexandria, Antioch, and the Levant, where Jewish apocalyptic thought, Platonic philosophy, Egyptian mystery religion, Zoroastrian dualism, and the emerging Jesus movement were in intense dialogue. Gnostic texts quote Jewish scripture, use Christian theological language, incorporate Egyptian divine names, and reflect the Neoplatonic philosophical framework, making Gnosticism impossible to reduce to any single one of its source traditions. Gnosticism a glance. Time and place, 1st to 4th centuries CE, primarily in the Eastern Mediterranean key claim, the material world was created by a lesser, flawed divine being, not by the highest God. The highest God is beyond this world entirely. The human situation, each human being carries a divine spark that is the prisoner of matter and seeks to return to its divine source. This spark is the true self, prior to, superior to, and ultimately indestructible by the material imprisonment. Salvation, not through faith, works, or ritual, but through Gnosis, direct personal knowledge of one's own divine nature and of the cosmic situation. The Demiurge, the creator god of the material world, identified with the Hebrew God by most Gnostic schools, not the highest God, but a lesser being whose imperfect or malicious creation is the source of the world's suffering. Primary texts, the Nag Hammadi library, containing over 50 Gnostic texts including the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, and the Gospel of Truth. The Gnostic cosmos pleroma, Demiurge, and the sparks. The Gnostic cosmological framework is one of the most elaborate and most theologically daring in the history of religion. A multi-layered account of the divine's self-manifestation, the tragic fall of a divine being into matter. The creation of the material world is a byproduct of that fall, and the human being's position as a prisoner of that creation, who nonetheless carries within themselves the seed of the divine that preceded and transcends it. The Gnostic cosmic structure, the pleroma, the divine realm, the fullness of divine light, beyond the material world entirely. The pleroma contains the highest God and a series of paired divine emanations, figures of the divine reality that together constitute the complete divine world. In Valentinian Gnosticism, there are 30 eons organized in 15 pairs. The fall of Sophia, within the pleroma, the youngest eon, Sophia, attempts to know the highest God directly, without the mediation of her divine partner. This attempt produces an abortive divine offspring, a formless, chaotic being that is not part of the pleroma and that falls out of the divine realm. This fallen being is the Demiurge. The Demiurge, the creator of the material world, a being who has some divine power but who is ignorant of the highest God and believes himself to be the supreme divine. The Demiurge creates the material world, including the material human body, from matter, using some of the divine light power that fell with Sophia, which becomes trapped in the material creation. The divine sparks, the fragments of divine light power trapped within the Demiurge's material creation, present in all things but most concentrated in human beings. The divine spark within each human being is their true self, the portion of divine light that is of the pleroma rather than of the material world, imprisoned in matter but retaining its divine nature and its potential to return to its source. the archons, the servants of the Demiurge, spiritual beings who maintain the material world and who resist the divine spark's attempt to ascend back to the pleroma. The Demiurge, the creator who is not God. The Demiurge is Gnosticism's most theologically radical and most controversial concept. The claim that the creator of the material world, the God of Genesis who made the heavens and the earth, is not the highest God, but a lesser being whose creation is flawed, whose knowledge is incomplete, and whose claims to supreme divine status are false. The Gnostic reading of Genesis. The Gnostic reading of the Hebrew Bible's opening chapters is inverted from the Orthodox reading. The God who creates the material world in Genesis, who creates human beings from dust and breathes life into them, who forbids them to eat the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and who expels them from the garden when they do. This God is the Demiurge, not the highest God. The serpent, in many Gnostic readings, is not the villain but the hero, the agent of the true God who brings Gnosis to human beings despite the Demiurge's prohibition. The Demiurge in different Gnostic schools. Not all Gnostic schools took an equally hostile view of the Demiurge. The most radical saw the Demiurge as positively evil, the God of the Old Testament as a malicious being. The more moderate schools saw him as ignorant rather than evil. He created the material world from genuine divine inspiration, without realizing that he was working with fallen divine light rather than the highest creative power. The Valentinian position is the most nuanced and most influential. Connection to halagricity. The Gnostic claimed that the creator of the material world is not the highest God, that the divine reality most people call God is a secondary being whose creation is a lesser expression of a divine reality far beyond it, is the most radical theological position in the Western tradition. It is simultaneously the most dangerous and the most consistent with the mystical recognition that the ultimate divine reality is fundamentally beyond the God who makes laws, judges people, and intervenes in history. Every mystical tradition has held that the personal God of ordinary religious experience is not the ultimate ground of being. Gnosticism is the Western tradition's most explicit and most institutionally developed expression of this recognition. The divine feminine Sophia and her fall. Sophia is the central tragic figure of the Gnostic narrative, the divine eon whose curiosity or presumption led to the fall that produced the material world and whose restoration to the pleroma is one of the primary goals of the cosmic process that the Gnostic path participates in. Sophia as the world soul. Zeus is not only the Demiurge, but also the material world that the Demiurge creates. The divine light that fell with Sophia, scattered through the material world as the divine sparks imprisoned in matter, is the Sophia substance that the Gnostic path works to liberate and restore. Every act of Gnosis, every awakening of a divine spark to its own nature, is a partial restoration of Sophia, a fragment of the divine wisdom finding its way back to the fullness from which it fell. Sophia and the Holy Spirit. Many Gnostic texts identify Sophia with the Holy Spirit, the feminine divine principle that, in the New Testament, moves over the waters of creation, descends on Jesus at his baptism, and is poured out on the disciples at Pentecost. The suppression of the feminine dimension of the divine in Orthodox Christianity, which developed a resolutely masculine trinity, is, from the Gnostic perspective, the theological expression of the Demiurge's dominance, the masculine creator God suppressing the feminine wisdom that preceded and exceeds him. Gnosis, knowledge that saves. Gnosis, the direct experiential knowledge of one's own divine nature, is the central concept and the defining goal of the Gnostic path. It is not intellectual knowledge about the divine. It is the direct, unmediated knowing of the divine spark's own nature, the moment of recognition in which the imprisoned fragment of divine light recognizes itself as divine light, as of the pleroma rather than of the material world, as ultimately indestructible and ultimately destined to return to its source. Gnosis, what it is and is not. What Gnosis is, direct, experiential, first-person knowledge of one's own divine nature, the recognition that the true self is not the material body, not the ordinary ego, not the product of fate and circumstance, but the divine spark that preceded all of these a transformative experience, Gnosis does not leave the person unchanged. It fundamentally alters their understanding of themselves and their situation, available to any sincere seeker, not mediated through a priest, a church, or an institution. What Gnosis is not, intellectual knowledge about Gnostic theology. Knowing the Demiurge story is not Gnosis faith. Pistis is the opposite of Gnosis. In Gnostic understanding, faith accepts something on the basis of authority. Gnosis knows directly moral achievement. Gnosis is not given as a reward for good behavior. It is an awakening of what is already present exclusively available to the elite. Some Gnostic schools where elitist class could receive Gnosis. Others held that Gnosis was available to anyone who genuinely sought it, the Haligric resonance. Gnosis, direct personal knowledge of one's own divine nature, is the Gnostic articulation of what Advaita Vedanta calls the recognition Atman equal to Brahman, what the Zen tradition calls Satori, what the Sufi tradition calls Fana, and what Haligricity holds about the practitioner's recognition of their own inherent divine nature as the foundation from which all sacred practice proceeds. The Nag Hammadi library, what was found. In December 1945, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman, digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, struck a sealed clay jar with his mattock. Inside the jar were 13 leather-bound codices, ultimately revealed to contain 52 texts in Coptic, most of them Gnostic texts that had been buried, presumably to protect them from destruction, at some point in the 4th or 5th century CE. The significance: before Nag Hammadi, Gnosticism was known almost entirely through the writings of its critics, the Church Fathers who wrote extensive refutations of Gnostic doctrine from the Orthodox Christian perspective. These hostile summaries were the primary source for knowledge of what the Gnostics actually believed. Nag Hammadi gave scholars, for the first time since the 4th century suppression of Gnosticism, direct access to what the Gnostics themselves wrote and said. Major Nag Hammadi texts: the Gospel of Thomas, 114 sayings attributed to the living Jesus, no narrative, no crucifixion, no resurrection story, just teachings. Among the most significant and most spiritually advanced texts in the entire library, the Apocryphon of John, the most complete account of the Gnostic cosmological myth, the Pleroma, the fall of Sophia, the Demiurge's creation of the material world, and the divine plan for the spark's liberation. The primary source for the Valentinian Gnostic system, the Gospel of Truth, attributed to Valentinus himself, a meditative, homiletical text on the nature of Gnosis and the divine's love for the scattered sparks. One of the most beautiful texts in the library, the Gospel of Philip, a collection of sayings and meditations, notable for its extended treatment of the sacraments and its description of Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion, whom he loved more than all the disciples. The Thunder, Perfect Mind, a revelation discourse in which a feminine divine voice presents herself in a series of paradoxical self-identifications. I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. One of the most remarkable and most mysterious texts in the entire library. The Gospel of Mary, the gospel in which Mary Magdalene, not Peter or the male disciples, receives and transmits the risen Jesus' teachings. The Gospel of Thomas, the living words. The Gospel of Thomas is the most significant and most spiritually concentrated text in the Nag Hammadi library. 114 sayings attributed to the living Jesus, introduced by the words, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymos Judas Thomas recorded." There is no narrative, no birth story, no passion narrative, no resurrection account. There is only the teaching, raw, unadorned, often paradoxical, consistently pointing toward the practitioner's direct recognition of their own divine nature. The opening saying, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." This opening is the Gospel of Thomas. In miniature, salvation is not through correct belief or through faith in the crucifixion and resurrection. It is through the correct interpretation of the living Jesus' sayings. The teaching is the vehicle. The gnosis it produces is the salvation. Key sayings from the Gospel of Thomas. Saying 3, "If those who lead you say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." Saying 22, "When you make the two into one, And when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, then you will enter the kingdom. Saying 77. I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. Saying 113. His disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? He said, it will not come by watching for it. It will not be said, look here, or look there. Rather, the Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people don't see it. The recognition, every one of these sayings points at the same recognition. The divine is not elsewhere, not in the future, not contingent on correct belief or correct behavior. It is here, inside you and outside you simultaneously, spread across the earth and invisible to those who look elsewhere. This is Atman, equal to Brahman in Aramaic dress. This is the recognition that halagricity holds as foundational. Your essential nature is divine, and sacred practice is the process of remembering and living from that recognition. 20. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The Gospel of Mary is one of the most theologically significant and most culturally consequential texts in the Nag Hammadi corpus, a text in which Mary Magdalene, not Peter or the male disciples, is the primary recipient and transmitter of the risen Jesus' inner teaching. Only 8% of the original 18 pages survive, but the surviving text is extraordinary. The Gospel's narrative, the surviving text opens after the resurrection. The disciples are in distress, fearful of the same fate as Jesus. Mary comforts them, and Peter asks her to share the teachings that the Savior gave her. She describes a visionary encounter with the risen Jesus, in which he teaches her about the soul's ascent through the 4 powers that seek to prevent it: darkness, desire, ignorance, and wrath, and about the soul's ultimate liberation. When she finishes, Andrew questions whether these teachings came from the Savior, and Peter expresses outrage. Did he really speak with a woman without our knowledge and not openly? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? The Gospel's significance. The Gospel of Mary presents a direct challenge to the authority structures of emerging Orthodox Christianity, in which apostolic authority was being centralized in the male disciples. By presenting Mary Magdalene as the primary recipient of post-resurrection teaching, and by showing Peter's hostile response to this, the Gospel of Mary encodes a specific theological and institutional conflict. Who has the authority to transmit the inner teaching, the institutional structure, or the direct recipient of the inner experience? The major Gnostic schools, the primary Gnostic traditions. Valentinian Gnosticism, the largest and most theologically sophisticated school, founded by Valentinus, who taught in Alexandria and Rome, and whose system was elaborated by disciples including Ptolemy, Heracleon, and Marcus. The most moderate of the major Gnostic schools, seeing the Demiurge as ignorant rather than evil, and holding that the material world contains divine light that can be liberated through Gnosis, the primary source of the classic Gnostic cosmological myth. Sethian Gnosticism, the most ancient and most radical form, centered on Seth as the first possessor of the divine spark, the ancestor of the Gnostic elect. Seth is sometimes identified with Jesus in Sethian texts. The Apocryphon of John and the Hypostasis of the Archons are primary Sethian texts. Marcionitism, founded by Marcion of Sinope, the most radical rejection of the Hebrew Bible and its God. Marcion held that the God of the Old Testament was not only distinct from the highest God, but actively opposed to him. He created his own simplified New Testament. Marcion's challenge forced the Orthodox Church to formalize its own canonical decisions. Mandaeanism, the only Gnostic tradition that has survived as a continuous living religion to the present day. Approximately 70,000 to 80,000 Mandaeans exist today, primarily in Iraq, Iran, and diaspora communities. The Mandaeans venerate John the Baptist as the primary prophet and practice frequent ritual immersion in flowing water. Manichaeism, founded by Mani in Persia, a deliberate universal synthesis of Gnostic, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, and Christian elements. At its height, Manichaeism spread from Spain to China and was a major world religion. Among its adherents, Augustine of Hippo, the Convergence, where Kabbalah and Gnosticism meet. Part 24, where Kabbalah and Gnosticism meet. Kabbalah and Gnosticism are not the same tradition, but they share enough common ground that tracing their connections illuminates both, and illuminates the single deep recognition that both, at their best, are pointing toward. Kabbalah and Gnosticism, the shared ground. The infinite ground, Both traditions hold that the highest divine reality is beyond all human comprehension, unknowable, beyond all positive description, accessible only through the via negativa. The approach of negative theology is the common epistemological foundation. The divine sparks. Both traditions hold that each human being carries a fragment of divine light. The Kabbalistic Nitzotz and the Gnostic Pneuma are the same recognition. The essential nature of every human being is divine, imprisoned in matter, but retaining its divine character and its capacity for return to the divine source. The feminine divine, the Kabbalistic Shekinah, and the Gnostic Sophia are parallel figures. The feminine aspect of the divine that is most present in the material world, most intimate with the human condition, and whose restoration to full divine status is a central soteriological goal. The power of the word, Kabbalah's understanding of the Hebrew letters as creative powers, and Gnosticism's understanding of specific divine names and formulas as spiritually transformative, are expressions of the same recognition. Sacred speech participates in the divine creative process. The Gnostic practice of reciting specific divine names during the soul's post-mortem ascent through the archons is the practical application of the same principle as the Kabbalistic meditation on specific letter combinations. The inner teaching. Both traditions hold that the inner teaching, the esoteric dimension of the sacred, is more significant than the outer. The Torah has a body and a soul. The Gnostic gospel sayings have a surface meaning and a deeper gnosis that transforms the practitioner who penetrates to it. The halagricity lends the hidden Western spine. Kabbalah and Gnosticism together constitute the hidden esoteric spine of Western spirituality, the inner tradition that runs beneath the surface of Western religious history, that fed every major Western esoteric movement from the Renaissance through the present, and that carries the same recognitions that the Eastern traditions carry in their own specific forms. The convergence with the Eastern half, the most powerful confirmation of the Haligric synthesis, is the convergence between the Western esoteric traditions and the Eastern traditions already in the Halagricity library. Ein Sof equal to Brahman, equal to the Tao, equal to none, equal to the Pleroma. The divine spark equal to Atman, the Sephirot equal to the chakras, the Golem tradition equal to Heka, equal to the Virescence, the Gnostic Gnosis equal to the Sufi Fana, equal to the Zen Satori, equal to the Vedantic recognition of Atman, equal to Brahman. These are not coincidences. They are the same recognition expressed through different cultural vocabularies. The Gospel of Thomas as Haligric foundational text. Of all the texts in either tradition, the Gospel of Thomas may be the most directly useful to the Haligric practitioner, not because it is Christian and not because it is Gnostic, but because it is the most concentrated, available record of sayings that point directly and repeatedly at the practitioner's own divine nature as the immediate, accessible, present foundation of sacred life. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. Split a piece of wood, I am there. The Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people don't see it. These are not theological propositions. They are invitations to look, right here, right now, at what has always been present, connection to halagricity. Ein Sof, the Pleroma, the divine spark, Sophia's fall and return, the Sephirot descending from Keter to Malkut, from the crown of pure divine light to the earth where human feet walk. The Gospel of Thomas saying, the kingdom is inside of you and outside of you, and you don't see it. Kabbalah and Gnosticism are not academic historical curiosities. They are the Western esoteric tradition's most complete ancient articulations of the same recognition that every tradition in this library is pointing at from its own direction. You are of the divine. You have always been of the divine. Sacred practice is the process of removing what obscures this recognition, which has never stopped being true. Grand rising. The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and people don't see it. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 113, Nag Hammadi Library. Ein Sof, without end, the light before the light, the God before God, from which all emerges and to which all returns. Kabbalistic formulation of the ultimate divine ground. The Gnostic spark knows it is the Pleroma's light and seeks return. The Kabbalistic practitioner traces the light back through the Sephirot to Ein Sof. The Gospel of Thomas says, stop looking elsewhere. It is here. It has always been here, in the wood, in the stone, spread out upon the earth that your feet have been walking on all along. Grand Rising, personal reading series, Halagricity, or IQ Productions, or May 2026.